The deafening crack of a gavel shattered Grace Wilkins' world as the town council of Prosperity Ridge condemned her to exile in the spring of 1875. For the crime of insolvency and failure to contribute to the township's prosperity, announced Mayor Hoffman, his jowls quivering with self-righteousness. You are hereby banished from Prosperity Ridge, effective immediately. Grace stood frozen before the council, 21 years old and utterly alone. Her father's recent passing had left her with nothing but debts, and the small homestead they'd struggled to maintain on the outskirts of town. The drought had ruined their crops, and her father's medical bills had consumed what little savings they had. Please, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. This is my home. Where am I to go? Councilman Peters, whose bank had foreclosed on their property just days after her father's funeral, adjusted his spectacles with manicured fingers. That, Miss Wilkins, is no longer our concern. Prosperity Ridge cannot support those who cannot support themselves. The West is vast. I'm sure you'll find somewhere more, accommodating to your circumstances. She looked around the town hall at faces she'd known her entire life, neighbors who now averted their eyes, former friends who found sudden interest in the floorboards. In that moment, Grace understood that poverty had made her invisible to them. You have until sundown, Mayor Hoffman declared, bringing down the gavel once more. 4 hours later, Grace stood at the edge of town, a small bundle of possessions clutched to her chest and her father's old mare, Penny, as her only companion. The spring air carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass, a cruel reminder of renewal and hope when hers had been stripped away. With no destination in mind, she headed west, following the setting sun across the vast prairie. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to look back at the town that had cast her out. By nightfall, exhaustion overtook her. Grace made camp beside a small creek, building a meager fire with trembling hands. Penny grazed nearby, the only sound apart from the crackling flames and Grace's quiet sobs. I didn't expect company out here, came a deep voice from the darkness. Grace jumped to her feet, heart pounding as she searched for the source. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, leading a sturdy chestnut stallion. The man was silhouetted against the night sky, his broad shoulders and Stetson hat unmistakably that of a cowboy. I'm just passing through, Grace said, backing away. I mean no trouble. The man stepped into the firelight, revealing a weathered face that appeared to be in his late 20s. His eyes, amber in the glow of the flames, assessed her with curiosity rather than threat. Miles Fielding, he offered, touching the brim of his hat. Foreman of the Triple Diamond Ranch. Grace Wilkins, she replied cautiously. Miles glanced at her small bundle and the solitary mare. You're traveling light for frontier country, Miss Wilkins, not the safest decision. It wasn't a decision, she answered, the bitterness in her voice unmistakable. I was given until sundown to leave Prosperity Ridge, his brow furrowed. Banished, that's medieval nonsense. What was your crime? Grace laughed humorlessly. Being poor, my father died, leaving nothing but debts. The town council decided I was a burden they couldn't afford. Miles was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentler than before. Your poverty made you mine, it seems. I beg your pardon, Grace stiffened, affronted. That came out wrong, Miles said quickly, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. I meant that the Triple Diamond could use another hand. We're short-handed with spring calving and the cook's been complaining about needing help. It's honest work with room and board. Better than wandering these plains alone, Grace studied him suspiciously. Why would you help me? Because decent folks don't leave others to the mercy of the prairie, he replied simply. And because I know what it's like to have nothing but your name. Grace considered his offer. She had nowhere to go, little money, and even less experience with the harsh realities of frontier survival. Pride warred with practicality, but in the end, her empty stomach and uncertain future made the decision for her. Until I find something better, she agreed cautiously. Miles nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Fair enough. We'll head out at first light. The ranch is half a day's ride from here. That night, Grace slept fitfully, aware of the stranger's presence across the fire. Yet for the first time since her father's death, the weight of complete solitude had lifted slightly from her shoulders. Dawn broke with a painter's palette of oranges and pinks stretching across the prairie sky. Miles was already awake, brewing coffee over a rekindled fire. He handed her a tin cup without ceremony. Drink up. We've got ground to cover. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it chased away the morning chill. They rode in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, the vast landscape unfolding before them. Occasionally, Miles would point out landmarks or share brief stories about the territory. By midday, the Triple Diamond Ranch came into view, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a verdant valley. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and cowboys moved among them with practiced ease. "It's beautiful," Grace murmured, taking in the peaceful scene. "It's home," Miles replied simply, though pride colored his voice. As they approached, a grizzled older man emerged from the main house, squinting at them with suspicion. "Picked up a stray, have you, Fielding?" he called out. "New help for the cook, Mr. Davidson," Miles answered respectfully as they dismounted. "This is Miss Wilkins." Howard Davidson, owner of the Triple Diamond, looked Grace up and down with assessing eyes. "Can you cook, girl?" "Yes, sir," Grace replied, standing tall despite her travel-worn appearance. "And sew and keep accounts. My father made sure I was educated." Davidson's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "Educated, eh? Well, Mrs. Fletcher in the kitchen will be glad for the help, and we could use someone with figures. Pay is $10 a month plus room and board." It was a fair wage for a woman's work on the frontier, and Grace knew it. "Thank you, Mr. Davidson. I'll earn my keep." "See that you do," the rancher nodded curtly before turning back to Miles. "Got trouble with rustlers in the north pasture. Briggs found cut fences this morning." Miles' expression hardened. "I'll gather some men and check it out." As Davidson retreated to the house, Miles turned to Grace. "Mrs. Fletcher will get you settled. I need to handle this situation." "Of course," Grace said, suddenly feeling awkward. "Thank you for bringing me here, Mr. Fielding." His amber eyes softened momentarily. "Miles, and you're welcome, Miss Wilkins." "Grace," she offered in return. With a tip of his hat, he was gone, striding toward the bunkhouse with purpose in his step. An imposing woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged from a building that emanated delicious aromas. "So you're my new helper," she stated, looking Grace over with a critical eye. "I'm Edith Fletcher." "Hope you're not afraid of hard work." "It's all I've ever known, Mrs. Fletcher." The older woman's stern expression eased slightly. "Good, let's get you cleaned up and settled. Feeding 20 ranch hands is no small task." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Grace rose before dawn each day to help Mrs. Fletcher prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. The days were filled with cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, and assisting with household accounts. Though exhausting, the work gave her purpose and the satisfaction of earning her place. Miles was often absent, his responsibilities as foreman keeping him in the field from sunup to sundown. When their paths did cross, their interactions were brief but increasingly warm. He would inquire about her adjustment to ranch life. She would ask about the cattle and ranch operations. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Grace was hanging laundry when Miles approached, leading his horse. "You're settling in well," he observed. Grace nodded, pushing a stray lock of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Mrs. Fletcher says I'm not entirely useless in the kitchen." Miles chuckled. High praise from her. He hesitated, then added, "Some of us are riding into town tomorrow for supplies. Would you like to come along? Might do you good to get away from the ranch for a spell." Grace's hands stilled on the damp sheet. The prospect of town brought back painful memories of her banishment, but also offered a welcome change from the routine she'd established. "I would like that," she decided. "Thank you." The following day, Grace found herself riding beside Miles in the ranch wagon. with 2 other cowboys following on horseback. The small frontier town of Silverdale was bustling with activity so different from the staid propriety of Prosperity Ridge. As they handled the ranch's business, Grace noticed how respected Miles was among the townspeople. Shopkeepers greeted him warmly, and even the banker deferred to his judgment on certain matters. It was clear that despite his young age, he had earned a reputation for fairness and competence. "You seem well regarded here," Grace commented as they loaded supplies into the wagon. Miles shrugged. "I've worked hard to be trusted, wasn't always the case." Before Grace could inquire further, a commotion erupted outside the general store. A young woman was arguing loudly with a well-dressed man whose hand was gripping her arm. "I told you I ain't interested, George," the woman exclaimed, trying to pull away. "You'll change your mind once you're my wife," the man insisted, tightening his grip. Without hesitation, Miles strode toward the pair. "The lady seems to have made her feelings clear, Prescott." The man, George Prescott, sneered at Miles. "This doesn't concern you, Fielding. This is between me and Lily." "When you're manhandling someone in public, it becomes everyone's concern," Miles replied evenly, though Grace could see tension in the set of his shoulders. Prescott released the woman's arm, turning his full attention to Miles. Still playing the hero. "I remember when you were nothing but a saddle tramp with a questionable past. Some things don't change." Miles didn't rise to the bait. "And some men don't learn respect. Miss Lily asked you to let her be. I suggest you honor that request." For a tense moment, it seemed Prescott might escalate the confrontation. Then, with a contemptuous laugh, he backed away. "She's not worth the trouble anyway. Enjoy your company of social cast-offs, Fielding." His gaze flicked to Grace. "I see you've added another to your collection." Grace felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but Miles remained unruffled. "I'd rather keep company with honest folk than wealthy vermin." "Good day, Prescott." As Prescott stalked away, Miles turned to the young woman. "Are you all right, Miss Lily?" "Thanks to you," she smiled, though her hands trembled slightly. "That man don't take no for an answer." She glanced curiously at Grace. "This is Miss Grace Wilkins," Miles introduced. "She's new to the Triple Diamond. Grace, this is Lily Barnes. She runs the millinery shop." Grace nodded politely, but her mind was still on Prescott's words about Miles' past. As they finished their errands and headed back to the ranch, curiosity finally got the better of her. "What did that man mean about your past?" she asked quietly when they were alone on the wagon seat. Miles was silent for so long that Grace thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "I wasn't always foreman material. After the war, I drifted. Did some things I'm not proud of to survive. Mr. Davidson gave me a chance when others wouldn't. I've worked hard to deserve it." Grace absorbed this information, seeing him in a new light. "We all have pasts we'd rather leave behind." "Some are easier to outrun than others," Miles replied, his expression distant. Then, with visible effort, he changed the subject. "Mrs. Fletcher mentioned you've been helping with the ranch accounts." Grace allowed the diversion. "Yes, Mr. Davidson seemed surprised that I could manage bookkeeping. Howard appreciates competence, regardless of where it comes from. That's why he's built the Triple Diamond into what it is today." As they approached the ranch, the setting sun cast long shadows across the valley. Grace found herself stealing glances at Miles' profile, seeing beyond the confident foreman to the man beneath one who, like her, had known hardship and rebuilding. Summer arrived in earnest, bringing scorching days and the constant work of maintaining the herd. Grace's responsibilities expanded beyond the kitchen as her abilities became apparent. She now managed most of the ranch's correspondence and bookkeeping, earning a small raise that she carefully saved. One sweltering afternoon, Grace was returning from delivering lunch to the men working the far pastures when she spotted Miles by the creek that ran through the property. He was shirtless, washing away the dust and sweat of the day's work, his back to her. Grace knew she should announce her presence or quietly retreat, but something held her in place. The muscles of his back rippled as he moved, and she couldn't help but notice the scars that marked his tanned skin remnants, perhaps, of the troubled past he rarely mentioned. As if sensing her gaze, Miles turned suddenly. Their eyes met across the distance, and Grace felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with the summer sun. "I apologize," she called, finding her voice. "I didn't mean to intrude." Miles reached for his shirt, pulling it over his head as he walked toward her. "No intrusion, just trying to wash away some of this prairie dust." The awkwardness between them was new and charged with something neither seemed willing to acknowledge. "The men appreciated the lunch," he said, breaking the tension. Grace nodded, clutching the empty basket tighter. "I should get back. Mrs. Fletcher will need help with dinner preparations." "Grace," Miles said as she turned to go, "there's a social in town next Saturday. Dancing, food, the usual frontier attempt at civilization. I wondered if you might want to attend, with me." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with implications beyond a simple outing. Grace realized that somewhere amid the daily interactions and growing respect, her feelings for Miles had developed into something deeper. "I would like that," she answered, a smile playing at her lips. "Thank you." The days leading up to the social passed with an undercurrent of anticipation. Grace worked with Mrs. Fletcher to alter one of the older woman's dresses a modest blue cotton that complemented her eyes and chestnut hair. "You've come alive these past months," Mrs. Fletcher observed as she helped Grace with the final fitting. "This place suits you." "It's given me purpose again," Grace admitted, "and people who value me for my contributions, not my finances." The cook hummed knowingly. "And I suspect a certain foreman values you for more than just your bookkeeping skills." Grace blushed but didn't deny it. "Miles has been kind to me from the beginning." "Kindness is where it starts," Mrs. Fletcher said with a rare smile. "Trust is where it grows." On the night of the social, Miles arrived at the main house looking transformed. Gone were the work clothes and trail dust, replaced by clean dark trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, though a rebellious lock fell across his forehead. Grace's breath caught at the sight of him, suddenly conscious of her own modest appearance. "You look beautiful," Miles said simply, his amber eyes warm with admiration. "Thank you," Grace replied, accepting his offered arm. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Fielding." The town hall had been transformed with lanterns and bunting. A small band played lively tunes, and couples twirled across the wooden floor. Grace felt a momentary apprehension as they entered. What if someone recognized her as the woman banished from Prosperity Ridge? Would they judge her? Judge Miles for associating with her? As if sensing her unease, Miles squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You belong here as much as anyone," he murmured. The evening unfolded like a dream. Miles introduced her proudly to neighbors and friends. They danced until Grace's cheeks were flushed and her feet ached pleasantly. During a break in the music, he brought her a cup of punch and led her to a quiet corner. "Having fun?" he asked, his smile reaching his eyes in a way she'd rarely seen. "More than I thought possible," Grace admitted. "Thank you for bringing me. Thank you for coming with me." Miles hesitated, then added, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you, Grace, something about my past that you should know." Before he could continue, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. George Prescott had arrived, clearly intoxicated and looking for trouble. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Miles and Grace. "Well, if it isn't the reformed outlaw and his charity case," Prescott called out loudly, silencing the music and conversations. Miles stiffened beside Grace. "Stay here," he said quietly, moving to intercept Prescott before he could approach them. "You're drunk, George," Miles stated firmly. "Go home before you embarrass yourself further." Prescott laughed, the sound ugly and slurred. "Me, embarrassed? That's rich coming from a man who ran with the Blackwell gang. How many men did you help rob, Fielding? How many died?" A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Grace felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. The Blackwell gang had been notorious outlaws in the years following the war, known for brutal efficiency and ruthlessness. "That was a long time ago," Miles replied, his voice tight. "I've paid for my mistakes." "Have you?" Prescott pushed, sensing vulnerability. "Does your little lady know what kind of man she's keeping company with? Or the people of this town? A leopard don't change its spots, Fielding." Miles stood rigid, neither confirming nor denying the accusation. The silence in the hall was deafening. Grace moved without conscious thought, crossing the floor to stand beside Miles. She slipped her hand into his, feeling the tension in his fingers. "I know exactly what kind of man Miles Fielding is," she declared, her voice carrying across the hushed room. "He's a man who offered help when I had nothing, who works harder than anyone to build something honest and good. Whatever he may have done in the past, he's more than paid for it with the person he is today." Miles looked down at her with an expression of astonishment, and something deeper, something that made her heart race. Around them, the tension in the room began to dissolve as townspeople nodded in agreement. Sheriff Carlton stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Prescott's shoulder. "I think you've said enough, George. Time for you to head home." As Prescott was escorted out, protesting loudly, Miles led Grace outside into the cool night air. Stars carpeted the sky above them, a vast canopy of light. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did." Grace turned to face him. Was it true about the Blackwell gang? Miles didn't look away, though shame darkened his features. "Yes, after the war I was lost, angry. Jake Blackwell offered direction when I had none. I rode with them for 2 years before I realized what I was becoming." He swallowed hard. "I turned myself in, testified against them, served 3 years in prison. When I got out, most doors were closed to me until Howard Davidson offered me work as a stable hand." Grace absorbed this information, understanding now why Miles had recognized something in her that night by the creek. They were both outcasts seeking redemption. "We all have pasts, Miles," she said softly. "What matters is who we choose to be today, tomorrow." Miles reached up to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "When I found you that night, alone and cast out, something in me recognized something in you. Your poverty made you mine in a way I can't fully explain. Not because I pitied you, but because I understood what it meant to start over with nothing but determination." "I hated you a little for saying that," Grace admitted with a small laugh. "I thought you were being condescending. I've never been good with words," Miles smiled ruefully. "But I'm trying to say that meeting you changed something in me, Grace. Made me believe that second chances aren't just about survival, but about finding joy again. Finding? Love." The word hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Grace's heart hammered in her chest as she realized that somewhere along the way, amid the daily work and quiet conversations, she had fallen in love with this complicated, honorable man. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling right and true. Miles drew her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of newfound hope and promise. Around them, the night wrapped them in privacy as they embraced their shared future. The following months brought changes to the Triple Diamond. With Grace's help managing the books and correspondence, the ranch's operations became more efficient and profitable. Howard Davidson, recognizing the value she brought, officially hired her as the ranch's business manager, a progressive move that raised eyebrows but ultimately earned respect throughout the territory. Miles and Grace's courtship progressed with the steady certainty of two people who had found in each other the acceptance they had sought elsewhere. They were married that autumn in a simple ceremony on the ranch, surrounded by the people who had become family. As a wedding gift, Davidson offered them the foreman's cabin, which they expanded over time into a comfortable home. Grace planted a garden that flourished under her care, a tangible symbol of their roots growing deeper into the land that had given them both a second chance. On their first anniversary, Miles presented Grace with the deed to a small plot of land adjacent to the Triple Diamond. "What's this?" Grace asked, examining the document with confusion. "It's ours," Miles explained, his eyes bright with excitement. "Davidson is selling us a portion of the northeast pasture, said it was time we started building something of our own." Grace looked up at her husband in astonishment. "Our own ranch. It's small to start," Miles acknowledged, "but it's good land with water access. We can build slowly, do it right." He took her hands in his. "What do you think?" Tears filled Grace's eyes as she realized how far they had both come from that night by the creek, she, penniless and homeless, he, carrying the weight of his past and seeking redemption. "I think," she said, emotion making her voice tremble, "that we've already built something wonderful. This is just giving it room to grow." Miles pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. From nothing to something, together. 3 years later, the Fielding Ranch was a modest but thriving operation. Grace and Miles worked side by side, their complementary skills creating a partnership that extended beyond their marriage. Their small herd grew, as did their reputation for fair dealings and quality stock. On a crisp autumn evening, much like the one when they had first met, Grace stood on the porch of their home, watching Miles return from checking on a pregnant heifer. Their 2-year-old daughter, Emma, played at her feet, her dark hair and amber eyes a perfect blend of her parents. "How's our expectant mother?" Grace called as Miles approached. "Doing well." "Should have a new calf by morning," he replied, scooping up Emma and spinning her around to her delighted giggles. As he set their daughter down, Miles wrapped an arm around Grace's expanding waistline where their second child grew. "And how are you feeling?" "Strong," Grace answered truthfully, leaning into his embrace. "Happy." They stood together, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and amber. The land that had once seemed so vast and intimidating now felt like home, a home they had built from nothing but determination and love. "I never thought I'd be grateful for being banished," Grace mused, thinking back to that painful day in Prosperity Ridge. "But if they hadn't cast me out, I would never have found you." Miles pressed a kiss to her temple. "Your poverty made you mine," he repeated the words he'd spoken years ago, now with a depth of meaning that transcended their original context. "And my past made me yours, 2 lost souls who found home in each other." As darkness settled over the prairie, they went inside to the warmth of their home, leaving behind the hardships that had once defined them. What remained was the life they had built together, a testament to the transformative power of love and the enduring strength of second chances.